Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Bulletproof for BJJ podcast. I'm JT and I'm here with ever wonderful Joey.
Always wonderful, Mr. Wonderful.
Better believe it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking the best books of 2020. Now that's just our opinion, but that's all we got to give you.
We read them all.
We did. We read a lot. We listened to a lot as well. Audiobooks count, but it doesn't matter if you read it or you listen to it. Getting that good info is what we're all about.
I actually didn't read that many books this year, I'm going to confess.
No, that's okay.
Having a baby really fucks up your reading.
Oh, believe that.
Tell you that.
Say
that right now.
And I think if you're not on the audiobooks thing, give it a try because it is the easiest way to passively consume information.
It's true.
In my opinion, like I feel like that's increased the amount of reading, so to speak.
Yeah, and it just slots into where you would listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Not where you would listen to our podcast, but the other ones, the shit ones that are on your list.
Yeah, don't worry about them.
Rogan, Ferris, fuck those guys. They've been around for a long time.
Leave it to
Get a
the
couple
side.
audiobooks in there, double down on the Bulletproof stuff.
Pretty much. Listen to double episodes of the Bulletproof podcast.
You know, we're actually going to turn all of our podcast episodes into audiobooks, so you can
There you
just
go.
listen to that and that.
Yeah, you get smarter as we talk about audiobooks. No, I think it's one of those things that I do still read books, but then I got busted. Ola busted me. She tricked me. So I got a lot of books on my kind of nightstand, like beside the bed thing.
Yeah.
And I'd forgotten. As soon as I see a book I like, I just buy it and it gets shipped. And Ola
You have like a like what how do you call it? You can like a book for you is like there's never a question of affordability. It's like no, that's an investment you can always make.
Yeah, I can afford 4 books a month.
You've like given yourself the green light, so to speak, on book buying.
I don't spend money on anything really.
Yeah.
But audiobooks, I will.
Fucking chicken breast.
Yeah, barbecue chickens, no budget. But it was funny. She's like, "How many books do you have on your nightstand?" And I was like, "Oh, not that many." She's like, "Yeah. What do you want to bet?" And I was like, "Oh, you chicken McFly?" I was like, "What do you mean want to bet?" She's like, "How many do you reckon?" I'm like, "I don't know." She's like, "I reckon you have more than 30." I was like, "Oh, bullshit."
Whoa.
I was like, "It's got to be sub 20 at best." I was like, "I reckon there's 15." She'd already counted. She'd gone over, counted them all. And then she's like, "All right, well, here's the deal. If I'm right, you have to get rid of all of them bar 3. Like, pass them on, put them in the shelf, do whatever, but they can't stay where they are."
She's like, this 28 copies of Jugo don't need to be here. You're like, but I wanted to read it more than once.
Go! Pretty much. But she was right. There was 34 books.
Holy shit! What? So we're talking like
More than one stack.
Wow.
Like 2.5 stacks. And I was like, "Oh, fuck, she's right." So I had to like really pick which ones I'm reading.
Yep.
And so I had to edit it down. And I think that's what it comes to when we do a selection like this. You've got to think through, what did I listen to? What did I read? What was the best? And that's what we're talking about. We read a lot of good stuff, but we're going to go to the best. So Joe, this is no particular order, but top 3 picks. Where are you going to start?
I'm starting with, it's probably one of the first books I read this year, The Oxygen Advantage. Yeah, by Patrick Mckeon. Wait,
Yeah.
Patrick Mckeon? Yeah, Irish fella. All about the breath.
Yep.
You can definitely recommend the book for anyone.
Yes.
But you can also listen to him on quite a few different podcasts and stuff. He's a good talker. But it's all about breathing and oxygen, and really for me, and I've spoken about it on other episodes, it redefined how I view breathing.
Yes.
And it was just kind of pivotal for me from that perspective. It's from reading that book, I've made a couple of fundamental changes. One is that I tape my mouth closed every night. I've been doing that every night since I read the book.
Wow.
Yeah, so 3M paper tape doesn't open until I take it off in the morning.
Wow.
And that's been pretty huge.
And how's that going?
It's awesome. I feel like if I don't do it, I'm like, fuck. Like I really, if I'm like, whatever.
You're sleeping good? That's okay.
Yeah. Felt a bit weird maybe for the first sort of week.
Okay.
Like I think maybe you wake up a little bit and you're like, oh, fuck, because I'm so used to breathing through my mouth. Now, if you're naturally a nose breather, you don't really need to do it. But I'm naturally a mouth breather.
Yes.
So when I'm asleep, I'm like, jaw drops open. I wake up with a fucking pasty mouth, dry throat, all that shit. Always have.
Yeah.
Notice it now with my son. Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of negative like health effects as a result of that, right?
You sure?
So taping has been fundamental. But the other part of it was, and I've done a bunch of things around breath over the years, courses, done some work with John Marsh. He's really into the breath. It's always brought attention to me that I need to breathe more through my nose. But for some reason, reading this book was maybe just a timing piece. But ever since I've read it, I've just been way more aware of my breathing throughout the day. And I'm much more in the nose, which is of benefit.
Yeah. And actually, you said something interesting, and I wanted to just get you just riff on this for a sec. You said that you can breathe too much, or like people who do a lot of like long endurance training, but their mouth breathing, there's an aging effect. Is that right? Was there something like that?
Yeah.
Can you just speak to that for a sec?
Yeah. So
because that was like, I was like, what?
Yeah. So the way he frames it, and again, don't take this as verbatim, but basically what I took from his book was that, aging, oxygen ages the body. Yeah. Right. So oxygenation of anything ages it, right? Like rust is oxygenation of metal.
Yeah.
So it's like oxygenation of it. There's a price to be paid. And there's almost, in a similar way, I think they say with the heart, that there's kind of like
a limit,
an amount of heartbeats that you get.
Right.
And your limit might be a little bit different to that person's, but basically there's a ceiling.
Yeah. Similar
with oxygen. And so he's like, people that are breathing a lot, which if you are a mouth breather, you are moving larger quantities of air. Because the nose restricts how much air you can get in, right? If you're an inefficient breather, you are moving a lot of oxygen. You are over-consuming oxygen. And so you are like, for someone, that was the paradigm for me, because I thought, because I'm a shit breather, I'm lacking oxygen. I kind of had that in my mind, like my blood doesn't have enough oxygen or something. But he's like, no, you're a shit breather. You have too much oxygen.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is, right?
I'm gonna have to get up on that.
So so the big one, he's like, if you look at efficient breathers at rest, you shouldn't be able to tell that they're breathing. There should be no visible sign that breathing is occurring. Shouldn't even see any movement to the torso or anything happening. And so he's like the imperceptible breath, I think he calls it.
I'm holding my breath
is
right
the goal.
now.
Yeah, and you're like, yeah, I can fuck with that. Of course, if you're doing athletic stuff, it's different.
It's hard.
Yeah. So that was a big one for me. What's top of the list, or number? What's your first pick?
I'm gonna go Effortless by Gregory Mckeon.
Ooh.
Who is
that's why when I say, I'm like, Patrick Mckeon, right?
Yeah.
I was like, hang on, is he that other guy?
So Greg Mckeon is English Irish heritage, I believe.
I think they've got about 4 different surnames over there.
Yeah, but he lives in the States, and he was originally the author of Essentialism, and his second book is called Effortless. The reason why he wrote this book is because he's like, people were coming to me and saying, I've cut it back to bare bones minimum, and I'm still overtaxed. What do I do?
Oh, like overtaxed energetically?
Well, yeah, life.
Right.
It's like I've really minimized my life to just like family and work, and I just focus on that, and I'm still overwrought. And it's really interesting because he talks about like his daughter went through this. Basically, I don't know if she had a tumor or she basically went right downhill, mentally, physically, everything. She was a happy, healthy girl to having to go through clinicians and surgeries and a lot of problems. And he found his life got incredibly complicated. And at the core of Effortless, which is a question I have to ask myself sometimes, is what would this look like if it was easy? Because we're always looking to make things harder, more complex, add things, do more. And he was saying, even if people follow the principles of essentialism, you still get to points in your life where it still feels, unless you're a monk and you've separated yourself from your life and you're just sitting in the temple, it's pretty hard to keep things super simple. And he was like, but actually, is there an easier way to do it? And actually looking at things and trying to find the way, which is not path of least resistance, but using imagination to be able to then...
There's the garage door.
Oh, what do you know? We are in the garage.
We're in the power cave.
Yeah.
Yep, it's stopped. It's going back up. Very good.
Yeah. Has your son got a hold of that?
He might have the
He's just
remote.
clicking it. But yeah, and I think I am someone who sometimes will overthink things and overcomplicate things. And
I don't believe it.
oh, believe it. And Effortless is really about how can we make this simpler,
I like that.
easier. Like, why look for harder? That's actually not the best way.
Yeah, I like that.
And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend it because there's obviously a lot more to it. But that's
What's-
what I got from it.
What's the what are they implying there though? Are they implying that life should be easy, or that things should be, or is it
No, it's not. It's sometimes when you're in a stressful situation, you're looking for more as the answer. And that's usually not the case. Oftentimes the solution is to remove things. And it's like, okay, this seems really hard and complicated. What would it look like if it was easy? Like, what would it take for this to be
simpler?
simpler?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
how do we move towards that? Like, maybe we don't need to have 3 meetings a week.
Yeah.
What if we could have one just really good meeting? How would we do that? And trying to think laterally around these problems we have and reframing and stuff like that. And I found it was actually really helpful for me because even when I'm talking with my friends, I would be like, oh, this sounds like a problem. What would it look like if this situation was like easy or solvable? How do you frame that? And that idea has been helpful with friends and talking with people.
That's cool. I like that. I like essentialism. I will add Effortless to my list.
Check it out.
Second cab off the ranks for me is Going Right.
Oh,
A Logical Justification for Pursuing Your Dreams by Logan Gelbrick.
okay.
Yeah. So Logan, you read that, Jules? Liked it? Yeah. So Logan is
I will take some notes.
owner of a gym in LA in Venice Beach called Deuce.
Oh, you went there?
Yeah, I went there.
Oh, straight up.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
I remember you talking about that.
Yeah, so I came to know Logan some years ago when he was out in Australia doing he does this thing called the Hold the Standard Summit,
Okay.
which I attended, which was really kind of a bunch of gym owners, and it was him presenting his sort of philosophy on how to run an elite organization.
Wow.
And he, instantly when you meet the guy, you're like, fuck, this dude is like, he's a real thinker.
Right.
And he runs this cool gym, but the way he articulates himself is beyond what you would think a gym owner would ever need to
Right.
be like.
Yes.
And anyway, from my perspective, he's a bit of a thought leader.
Nice.
And so I actually had him on the Jungle Brothers podcast
Cool.
earlier this year, recorded right here in the garage, obviously through Zoom,
Whoa.
in this very garage, probably in one of these 2 baby chairs that we're sitting in right now.
Amazing.
Yeah. But anyways, he wrote this book, Going Right, and it's all about the format you can kind of picture. He's taking like stories of people who have achieved great things in sport and in business and in life, and then he's paralleling that with basically an argument for why you should chase your dreams too. And always sort of referring back to how the machine that we're in will always push us away from our dreams. The
Right.
machine's always like, no, don't do that. That's risky. Go with what's safe. But his whole thing is like, actually, what the world needs is for you to chase your dreams,
Yes.
because what's safe is going to fuck you up.
Yes.
So it's really, really just a really great book on, like, it's very inspirational, and it's stuff that you're like, oh yeah, oh, wow, this, whatever, this baseball player, oh yeah, they failed this many times, and then they succeeded. It's all that sort of generic,
Yeah, cool.
inspo stuff, but it hits hard.
Nice.
And I'm like, that was cool.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's cool you got to meet him, to like, one, get to interview him, but then go and train with him and like not just do his thing, but then see him in his element.
Yeah.
That's cool. I don't think people often get that chance to meet the author, so that's
He's an amateur jiu-jitsu player. He invited me to go roll when we were there, but it was like a 7 a.m. class. I was on holidays.
When you say amateur-
Joey doesn't do 7 a.m. class.
no, he doesn't. But when you say how long is he in the jiu-jitsu journey?
He's been, so he was doing jits when he was here for the summit, which was probably 4 years ago.
Is
But he trains like
blue or purple?
once a week.
Oh.
And he was...
This is what excellence looks like.
Yeah.
Cross face.
And he's like, bruh, he's like, I go to the morning class, we throw down a little bit, we get coffee. He's like, it's really nothing special. He's like, sometimes I don't go.
Oh.
It's a bit, for him, it's like...
Excellent.
It's an outlet of sorts,
I get it. Not everyone can be great at everything. That's fair play. Fair play. You can't just be the gym philosopher king and also be good at jiu-jitsu.
Actually, can I make a reference there though?
Please.
I think it's episode 147 of the Jungle Brothers podcast.
Check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Me and Logan having a chat. If you're in that kind of realm, you're in the gym thing, strength thing, you'll appreciate it.
Yeah, sounds like a ledge. Mate, number 2 for me is a bit of a weird one. This is something that you guys, it's actually a bit of a history lesson. It's called How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley. Matt Ridley is he's a scientist, actually. He's from England. And it's basically the history of every major technological innovation to date.
Wow.
Talks about hybridizing wheat, how wheat nearly completely failed, and how World War II was the reason why wheat became this thing in the
most successful species on our planet.
Basically. And it was only because they got it from Japan. It was this particular like short stalk wheat that they hybridized with this Kentucky wheat. Because wheat crops were failing, it would rain too much and it would collapse the stalks and it would just rot. It talks about the history of gunpowder and it's crazy because it talks about toilet, it talks about the steam engine, cars, like everything from fire through to where we are now.
Wow.
But the delineation is this: it's not about invention. His argument is invention is easy. Innovation is where you get society. It's so good, society adopts it. So innovation isn't always the first person to come up with it, because you might have a person who's an inventor, but they're terrible at marketing or they don't have the ability to make it a worldwide thing. It's the innovator is the person who's able to get the king to adopt the behavior.
Right.
So for example, potatoes in France. For example, potatoes were outlawed for a period of time. And he talks about how potatoes came from the Aztecs in South America and were brought to Europe. And for a long time, it was like, no, they look like tumors. We don't eat things that look like tumors. But then he's like he talked about the guy who was like this particular concierge who's like, no, whatever, Louis XIII of France, dude, you can make money on tax. You can grow more food per hectare using potatoes than wheat. And he's like, you can make money on tax. Ah, very good. Ah, oui. And then before you know it, French fries,
right on.
Big money, baby. That might not be the evolution, but yeah, it's so interesting because he talks about these people who did stunts to try and show like, here's the electric engine better than the steam engine, and
yeah,
just all this stuff, and the process is crazy. But what you don't, I guess, I'm not a history nerd, but I learnt so much. I was like, wow, this is really powerful because you take for granted that wheat works, but if they hadn't if Japan hadn't lost its part of the war, the Americans wouldn't have been exposed to this wheat, and wheat as a product would have failed because they hybridized this special short stalk Japanese wheat with the Kentucky red, whatever. And that made the perfect stalk of wheat that wouldn't collapse under rain and would have high yield and all this stuff.
Okay.
Talks about Monsanto, talks about how they're innovating to do what they're doing. He's not saying good or bad. He's just saying this is what's happening.
Innovation.
Yeah, talks about electric cars, all of that.
Does he talk about Nikola Tesla by any chance?
Yeah, he talks about Tesla and Alexander Graham Bell and all of that. And it's kind of sad because Tesla was so smart, but also for all of his invention and genius, he was also he was his own worst enemy. He wasn't the best at being able to sell and market and productize his invention. And yes,
Edison was the guy who could do all that, wasn't he?
But then Edison was also okay, this might be a crude analogy, but Steve Jobs had a lot of people working for him, right?
Yeah.
So even though Steve Jobs had this vision, he was much more in the idea of the marketing and the selling and telling the story. And he had a lot of people inventing stuff under his wing. Yeah. And that's where, Edison had hundreds of people working for him, making these things that were his ideas. Right. And then, him being like, look at what I invented. Yeah. And that guy's died of lead poisoning. Like that kind of shit. Yeah. And people hate on him, but if it wasn't for his ability to have the money, get the loans, excuse me, and do that process, we wouldn't have so much of what we have now. Yep. And unfortunately, even though from what I understand, the small amount I understand about Nikola Tesla, brilliant, but also terrible business, not a business guy. Yeah. And that's the thing about innovation. The difference between invention and innovation is the cultural adoption,
Right.
where it's so good. Why would you do it the other way?
Yeah.
And man, I learned so much from that. So How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley is actually an awesome book.
That sounds sick.
That's good.
It's interesting. I read a book years ago, Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about that.
Yeah, I think Jared Diamond.
Yes.
Sounds like a lot of parallels.
Mm.
You know, it's just in the way of like talking about like things that were revolutionary in the human story. Kind of sounds like a very similar sort of vibe.
Yeah, I mean, like, funny little anecdote. At one point in time, they were taking all the manure and all the urine from the farmers to make gunpowder.
Wow.
And so they couldn't fertilize the soil. So even though they're having all these wars, they couldn't actually sustain their crops and people are dying. So then they were like, oh, let's go down the Caribbean or let's go off the coast of America. And there were islands of guano, dried bird droppings,
Oh, wow.
like islands. And they would just like carve them out. And there was a 3-month line of ships lining up to take the guano back to England to fertilize the soil.
Holy shit.
Yeah, that was a real thing. And there were wars in South America over a particular island, which was the fuel source for agriculture.
Wow.
You're just like, what?
A natural fertilizer.
Yeah, amazing. So then once they got petrochemicals and they started like doing it that way, they're like, oh, we don't need guano so much anymore. Oh, away you go.
Okay.
Interesting.
That's a good tie into my third pick, which I actually haven't finished yet. I'm halfway through.
Okay.
But I'm all about it. It's called The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan.
Yes.
Michael Pollan, for those who don't know him, he's a well-known author. I think he's on all the big podcasts. You can hear him on Ferris, Rogan, all those cats. I listened to him recently on Diary of a CEO, which isn't.
Yep.
I don't mind that show, but he did a series on Netflix called Cooked,
Yes.
which I highly recommend. It's like a 3-part kind of mini-series. But he's a fascinating guy. And The Omnivore's Dilemma is all about his sort of deep dive into the world of food production. So he goes, he buys like a baby cow, like a calf, and then kind of sells it into the big commercial sort of industrial system. And then he tries to follow it. And he can only follow it to a certain point before he kind of gets cut off from, before the cow becomes like an economic unit. But, he does that. He talks all about corn production and how corn is a commodity that is, separated from what used to be like farmers would grow their food and then sell their food. It's like now this shit is just grown. We don't know where it all comes from. It all gets combined and all gets turned into these products that we see on the shelves in the supermarket. And then he'll parallel that with a big dive into like organic food production on an industrial scale, but then organic on a micro scale, and the shit that he's learning along the way. It's really good. I think it's sort of one of those books that I feel is like it's almost an obligation for people to read because it just points you to the inefficiencies of our food system.
Yes.
And it's like, well, those inefficiencies are probably one of the greatest things harming our planet. Yeah. And it's like, I don't think anyone should stay like oblivious to that. It's not necessarily the case that you can do anything about it. You might not be able to disengage with the commercial food supply. I know I haven't fully, but still ate McDonald's the other day and shit. But for the most part, you have to be like, all right, well,
try to make some good decisions.
Yeah, what can I support? What growers are in my area? That whole sort of thing.
Reduce impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, and like eat better food, right? Like be healthier.
For sure. I mean, I watched a documentary many, many years ago. It's probably like 15 years ago now, which was talking about, I can't even remember the name of it. My father's vegetarian. He's always pushed that from an ethical perspective, and I know it's better for the environment. I think one of the hardest things is I actually got into a discussion with a guy who majored in the evils of agriculture, which is pretty intense. He studied sustainable agriculture and basically said, it's not possible. Like, I was like, because we were talking about vegetarianism, and I said, I feel that's the better way. And he said, well, actually, it's kind of hard because we're putting all of these nutrients in the ground to absorb them into plants and then rip it out of the plants to ingest it through the plants, but we're degrading the soil.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen there's a particular guy who's to save our soil. It's a big thing about trying to re-enrich soil and how that's really the future, because if we don't do that, then We're not
We're all
going to be.
fucked.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's kind of it is frightening, guys. Like I mean, I have thought this as another thing to think about. Is just trying to consider like how can I lessen my impact. So, for example, maybe turkey mince has less impact on the globe than beef mince. So maybe that's a halfway step.
Yeah.
Or like having your own chickens in your backyard to have some eggs that way. You feed the chickens, you control that. And I think there was something that said the other day, I can't remember where it was referenced, that if every American who had enough space, and this isn't, I'm not just putting on you, our American cousins, Australians too, because a lot of Australians have backyards. If you had 2 or 3 chickens, we wouldn't need the chicken population for eggs the way we do.
Yeah, right.
You know, but we just don't want to do it. We don't want to deal with chicken shit, and
Yeah.
we don't want to deal
We
with...
don't have time to go out there and get the eggs.
Yeah. So I think that's cool, man.
Yeah, I mean, on that, like, I mean, it's a huge discussion, right? But yeah, I don't think meat plays a part in a healthy...
Yeah.
Yeah, and he spends time with Joel Salatin. Do you know Joel Salatin?
No.
He's super interesting. He owns a farm called Polyface Farms.
Okay.
And you would have seen him. He's in a lot of these kind of agricultural kind of food docos.
Okay.
And he's got he has his farm, and basically what he does is he rotates his stock constantly.
Right.
And he has this really neat system where he uses electric fences to move the animals around, and he'll move them like on an almost daily basis.
Wow.
But he'll have the cows come in and they'll eat, like the grasses will grow. Cows will come in, eat the grass. Then he'll move the cows on. Then he'll bring in the pigs.
Right.
The pigs will come in and rip up all the ground. And so what that does is it allows the new seeds of grass to germinate.
Nice.
And it exposes bugs. Then he'll move the pigs on and he'll bring the chickens in.
Oh, nice.
The chickens will come in, eat all the bugs and shit everywhere.
Fertilize, yeah.
And then he'll leave the paddock for some time. The grasses will flourish. He brings the cows back in. He just has this system that he uses. So it's all rotational. But every animal plays a part, and he actually calls himself a grass farmer.
Oh.
He's like, that's actually what I'm doing is I'm farming the most luscious grasses, and that gets my animals the most excited, and that's how we produce healthy animals that can express themselves and produce high yields of meat and whatever. And there's no, it's a closed loop system. There's no waste.
Nice.
You know, we're not all they're enriching the soil rather than degrading, right?
Yeah, impressive.
And so, yeah, when you hear that, you're like, fuck, there's ways you can do this stuff.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily fit with the huge mass scale monoculture type farming that our societies live on.
It is hard. And it's, if you think you've already got enough to think about with the anxiety inducing news cycle, and then someone starts to talk to you about what's going on with farming, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It feels like a lot.
You pick your battles.
But I think the good thing about that is you can make changes in small ways. Like whether that be just, hurts me to say, my swole friends, eat a little bit less meat, choose where you're getting it. Like my parents have chickens, which is awesome. And so you're literally eating the eggs from the chickens you fed this morning on the compost, the food scraps,
Yeah.
So you're not putting that in food waste, you're giving it to the chickens.
Yeah. They're
They're
turning that waste into meat and eggs.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like that's really good. And it's a challenge, but being informed is better than ignorance, I think.
What's your third book?
Mate, not Effortless. We are going to Atomic Habits.
Oh.
James Clear.
Good book.
Power. I read it at the start of the year, and it's just I've read other books on habits. Like I read BJ Fogg's book, Tiny Habits, which were released at the same time. I feel James Clear is the most concise, and he makes it really accessible. It's not too theoretical. It's literally like you are trying to change your behavior. Here's how.
Yeah.
And it's we talk about lowering the barrier to entry. He does that. He's like, look, start with this. And it's so, I guess it really resonates because it's similar to what we talk about with jiu-jitsu or strength training. Like if you can't don't try and do 5 things at once. Just do this one thing. Just do that and work at that. And he makes it incredibly accessible. And he gives a lot of parallels and of using this research, the science, and being like, this is what the research shows. And here's how you can execute that.
Yeah.
And here's what I do. And man, I mean, it's a crazy bestseller, but what's interesting is there's a lot of people who have no idea about that book, and people get really hooked up in motivation and inspiration. And I think I used to be one of those people. I'm a kind of hype person. I'm like, I want to be inspired. Yeah, woo. But actually that ebbs and flows. And really, this is a saying that stuck with me. We don't rise to the heights of our hopes. We fall to the lows of our training. Like that's really where we go. So if you're not trained, if it's not a habit, you're not likely to do it. The biggest problem is, how do we get a new habit? How do we do that? Because all the time we have habits and they're very unconscious. We just kind of got them over time. I just always done it that way. So, all right, how do we change that behavior? And one of the really good things he talks about is like habit stacking.
I like that.
It's so good. It's like just pair something you want to bring in, like journaling, say, and do it with your morning coffee.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have that morning
already
coffee
did the
anyway.
coffee, yeah.
You're going to sit there for 2-3 minutes. You'd scroll on your phone, write some stuff down. It's like, yeah, that's accessible. I could do that.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So I found that to be really practical, very clear, easy read. Recommend it to anyone. You've read it?
I read it, yeah, maybe, I don't know, last year or something. Yeah, I loved it as well.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, like it's almost a must read for people for anyone who feels like they're maybe not operating as efficiently as they could be. It's like, fuck, read that. It will help you tighten up some shit.
Totally.
Whether you want to be more productive or whatever. Like just bring in a new habit. I used the habit stacking idea to start reading more.
Cool.
I was like, fuck, I've fallen out of the habit of reading. And I was like, habit stacking, what am I doing? Well, every morning, this is during COVID. I was like, I'd get up, I'd go upstairs, I'd do a bit of breath work, and then I'd journal and start my day. I'm like, well, I'm just going to add 20 minutes of reading to that process. And it was like, how can I not do it now? I'm here journaling. There's the book. Yeah, it's mad.
Do it. Yeah, nice. No, I love it. Doesn't matter if you read it or you get it on audio. It's great.
That's our top 3 each from 2022.
Yes, sir.
Fucking hell. And a couple of days left in the year. We spoke about it last episode, but the app is out now. Bulletproof for BJJ.com. You can find it. It's there. Jump in. It's free. Start training. All of our programs are there. And we're there. And fucking give it a go and tell us what you think. We'd love to see you on the community page.
Love it.
Cheers, guys.